Hello again, friend. How you doing? We are continuing our series on self-compassion today, and I'm excited about it. I'm not gonna lie. I actually asked my email list last week to hit reply and tell me, what do you think about self-compassion? What comes to mind? And I got some really interesting responses. So this confirms that none of you are alone in any of these things that are happening, especially if you know logically what you're thinking is not the actual truth. This happens all the time. And everybody who responded said, even though I know this isn't the technical definition, this is what happens in my head. So, yeah, this is happening for all of us. One person said, I imagine boo-hooing about my bad feelings. It's a person after my own heart, just making up verbs to suit our own needs. And I'm here for it. I imagine boo-hooing about bad feelings, like throwing myself a pity party. Totally used to be my line of thinking as well. One person shared, it makes me think that I'm trying to convince myself that all is well when I know it's not, like pulling the wool over my own eyes. Interesting. And another person shared, I worry about focusing on negativity. Like if I practice self compassion, in quotes, I'll dramatize and even create more self doubt or worry or whatever is happening when maybe it's just better for me to get over it. This is really interesting, right? In last week's episode, I shared that the research Dr. Kristin Neff has done showed that the number one block to people learning and practicing self compassion is the fear that it will undermine our success, kill our momentum. Basically, it will be bad for us. So I just want to invite you to check in for a second. What happens in your head when you think about self compassion? Do you share any of these people's gut reactions, even if, like they said, you know, this isn't what it actually means? I want to propose that we all agree none of us wants this stuff. None of this is what any of us are going after. Let us actually create a collective agenda for creating our highest success in conjunction with having the best relationship with ourselves. How does that sound? I feel like this is an agenda most of us can get on board with because we want success. So if we can get on board with this agenda to create our highest success, and we use this boundary of having the best relationship with ourselves, that means we get all the success, yay, yes, please, without burning ourselves out, without keeping ourselves in misaligned situations, doing things that we don't really want to do slash hate. It means we be authentic. We make success fun. We throw ourselves Harry Potter marathons when that's exactly what we need that day. So let's fold self compassion into this plan, shall we? If we go to the Latin root of the word compassion, it means to be with suffering. So self compassion is being with our suffering. So this whole series where we're talking about self compassion and breaking it down and finding out how it affects our decisions, we're going to assume we have this shared agenda of creating our highest happiness alongside our best relationship with ourselves. And self compassion is just going to be a necessary element of that plan. We are going to plan to be with our suffering in an intentional and effective way along our journey because suffering is going to happen because humaning. So in today's episode, we are going to break down the first kind of self-compassion. Last week, we noted that there are two kinds. There is a more inner or a more still or a more tender version of self-compassion. And there is a more outer or a more active or a more fierce side of self-compassion. So let's break down what the first kind means so that you can start doing it right freaking now and start getting good at it this very week so that by next week, you're already going to be halfway to being a self-compassion pro. I can't wait. This is going to be so much fun. So Dr. Kristin Neff, who I mention often because she's the leading researcher on self-compassion, her website is linked in the show notes. It's chock full of resources and research and practices and exercises. So yum, yum, yum. Go check that out. I'm going to share the three elements of self-compassion as she defines them. And I'm going to use them to introduce this tender kind of self-compassion to you. Technically, these three elements are required in all self-compassion, tender and fierce. Technically, the elements remain the same for either side of the coin that we're on. But in my experience with introducing these ideas to people, it makes a lot of sense to connect these three elements that we're going to go through to the tender version or the inner version of self-compassion. So all will become clear as we get through it. And I want to start by sharing what Dr. Neff calls the quintessential question of self compassion, which is, what do I need right now? And since compassion means to be with suffering, really, the quintessential question is, what do I need right now to help alleviate my suffering? And these three elements can be a place that you go to answer that question. Because it's not always the easiest question to answer. When you're in it, when you're in the middle of some stress, some fear, some anxiety, some anger, whatever flavor of suffering that you're in, it can be hard to know, what do I need to alleviate this suffering? I want to offer that you start thinking about these elements as options. Kind of like, well, if I didn't know what else to do, could I offer myself any one of these three things? And could that help alleviate my suffering? So the three elements are self kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. What does that mean? Let's break it down. So, self kindness is often the easiest to understand because we basically know when we're being kind to ourselves. We definitely know when we're not. This means talking to yourself, thinking about yourself in a kind way, in a supportive, understanding, friendly way in a moment of suffering. So when you're going through any of those things that we listed out, a moment of anxiety, a moment of, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get over this failure. And I just ruined my entire life and my career's on fire and I'm the worst. Or, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that embarrassing thing. Is so and so ever going to forgive me? I feel like butts right now. If you're ever in that moment, and you're feeling those things and you're thinking those things, offering yourself self kindness in that moment means being with your suffering in a kind way. What this sounds like is saying or thinking things like, this is so hard right now. I'm so sorry. I love you. I'm here for you. What do you need, buddy? It's literally what you would say to anyone in your life in a moment of suffering when you were being kind to them. What self kindness is the opposite of is self judgment. Raise your hand or raise an eyebrow if you're driving if you have had experience with self judgmental habits. JK, trick question. We're all humans. What I find is this can feel a little floofy to people. This can feel a little squishy. Remember, some of the replies we got in the emails were like, self compassion, the idea makes me feel like I'm boo hooing myself or trying to pull the wool over my eyes that everything is fine when I know it's not. I really want you to notice the specific nuance of this element of self compassion. Self kindness doesn't mean everything is going to be okay. You're going to make it. This isn't that bad. It's really like, I want you to imagine your friend in a really tough moment, or your partner if they just bombed a presentation at work, or your kid just had a job interview and they think that they just did the worst. You say things like, I'm so sorry. That sucks. This is so hard right now. What do you need? I'm here for you. Right. And it's the opposite of judgmental language, which is how we can tend to very quickly talk to ourselves. What self judgment sounds like in these moments of suffering is, I'm such an idiot, or you are so dumb, or this is such a waste of time feeling this way, like being afraid of this thing. I shouldn't feel this way, or I shouldn't be thinking this. Imagine how you'd never talk to someone else, pretty much, someone you like in a moment of suffering. You would probably never tell them, this is such a waste of time feeling bad about doing poorly at work today. You're such an idiot. So as you go through your week, you can start paying attention to, when do I experience moments of suffering? Anywhere along the scale, from small concern or mild anxiety to holy moly, total embarrassment, total imposter thinking. And notice how you're talking to yourself. And notice if you think your only options are being super hard on yourself and using this judgmental language, or coddling or invalidating your feelings, like throwing yourself a pity party or just telling yourself to get over it. And see if you can meet yourself in the middle with this kind of neutral but very friendly language. Like, this is so hard right now. I'm so sorry. Me. Okay, the second element of self compassion is common humanity. This means framing the experience of suffering that you're having as a normal part of the common human experience rather than something that's just happening to you or that shouldn't be happening and it's totally your fault and everything's on fire. This can be a tricky one for people to understand because we can hear it like we're saying, everybody deals with this, so get over it. That's not the point we're making. What this element of self compassion really does is it honestly challenges you to recognize that making mistakes and feeling fear and being imperfect are all part of the human experience. And it's actually something that connects all of us. And the value of including this element in your self compassionate thinking is that it keeps you from isolating. What this can sound like is saying or thinking things like, everybody feels this way. It is normal to feel this way right now. Of course, I am feeling this. Everyone feels a version of this. I am not alone in this experience. No, important note, there is a necessary absence of eye rolling and pity partying in all of these things that we're saying to ourselves in this moment. Because, of course, I feel this way with a hand on your heart in a way that makes you feel connected to your fellow humans. It's very different than, of course, I feel this way. Rolling your eyes. Here I go again, being a drama queen, wasting time. Blah, 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 blah. So make sure you're not eye rolling. And a really effective way to understand what common humanity is by looking at what it isn't, which is isolating. It's really believing that I am alone in this experience. No one can understand me. I shouldn't be feeling this way. I shouldn't be feeling this way. It's such an isolating thought because it separates you from the common human experience of doing things imperfectly and creating results we don't like, and then thinking negative thoughts and feeling negative emotions literally all the time. It's very human to do that. So letting yourself have that moment, it is suffering. You're not talking yourself out of it and you're not minimizing it by saying everyone feels this way. You're really letting yourself feel connected to humanity and having a moment of recognition that, damn, being human means sometimes feeling quite crappy. And at least I'm not in it alone. Okay, let's get to the third element, which is mindfulness. Oh, Nelly, this is one of the absolute hardest elements to incorporate into your normal habits. But when you build this skill, when you are able to exercise self compassion with mindfulness, you can save yourself so much stress and so many decisions that you don't like. It's worth working at, even if it feels a little challenging. What mindfulness is on its own is being able to witness your own thoughts and emotions. So, mindfulness within self compassion is witnessing your thoughts and feelings in a moment of suffering. It's having a balanced perspective of your experience so that you're not overindulging the negative thoughts and negative feelings. You're not diving into the deep end of the drama pool and just living in the worst stories and worst emotions without even noticing. And you're also not invalidating or ignoring the thoughts and feelings in your moment of suffering. And I think it makes a lot of sense that this is a challenge for a lot of people because when you're in a moment of suffering, the suffering can feel tad consuming. It could be difficult to be having a thought and feeling a hard emotion. And then at the same time, notice consciously, I'm having a negative thought and I am feeling a negative emotion. It's really a skill that you build up of being able to have an experience and notice the experience at the same time. I shared a story in last week's episode where I demonstrated using mindfulness in a moment of suffering. I was walking through my hallway, just having a really down moment, wanting to be super hard on myself. And I didn't want to suppress and ignore those thoughts and feelings to just get through the moment. And I also didn't want to jump into the deep end of the drama pool and just spend the next 16 hours believing the terrible thoughts and judging the terrible feelings. So, what I did in that moment was use mindful self compassion. I literally told myself, yes, out loud, I know that I'm thinking I need to be really hard on myself right now. That's mindfulness, folks. It's not a magic trick and no fireworks go off at the end of it. But it has a profound effect on your experience of suffering when you can say, I know I'm thinking this. I know it feels so important to think this terrible thought about myself right now. I know it feels true. You don't even have to go as far as I did when I said the next sentence, which is, I know I don't have to believe it. Just saying, I know that I'm thinking it's really important to be hard on myself, or it's true that I'm the worst and I've ruined everything. Just putting that tiny amount of distance between you and that thought, you and that emotion helps you from over identifying with those thoughts and feelings. It's a way to alleviate your suffering, which is our goal with self compassion, by really putting some helpful boundaries around the suffering experience. What mindfulness sounds like is exactly what I shared just now. I know I'm thinking this, or I can see that I am thinking this. It doesn't have to be all thoughts directed at you, too. This is any suffering. So it's suffering because you're judging yourself, it's suffering because you're really mad at someone. It can be a really strong sense of fear that you're in. So you can notice, I know I'm thinking this. I know this feels true right now. I can see myself wanting to believe this. I can hear myself thinking this. And the same thing goes with the emotions. I'm feeling the emotion of resentment. It sounds very clinical. It sounds very like sterile language. And you don't have to say it like this. You can witness your emotions in any kind of way. You can say, I'm feeling resentment. You can say, I'm feeling shame. You can say, I know I'm feeling fear right now. That is a way to be with your suffering in that moment mindfully that prevents you from over identifying with these thoughts and feelings. The opposite of mindfulness is over identifying. When you can't even hear yourself thinking thoughts or notice your body feeling emotions, you just believe I'm the worst. I'm a failure. I've ruined everything. You're in the deep end of the drama pool and you don't even remember jumping in. You're just like, yep, the world is made of water now. This is reality. I don't have a choice. So we know we got so granular today, but this is how you learn self compassion in a way that you can use it in your real life. This is how you start learning that language of self compassion and folding it into your everyday dialogue, practicing it in these really specific ways. So I really want you to notice this week if you're in a moment of suffering, like I've said, anywhere on the scale, notice how you're thinking and feeling about yourself, about that suffering, and try out even just one of these elements. It might not feel monumental, but what will feel monumental is what you're not doing. So I'm going to recap the three elements that we went through and their opposites, because the more you try to use these three elements, the less you tend towards their opposites, which that, my friend, you will feel a huge difference. So we're going to start practicing more self kindness, which is going to help us use self judgment less often. We're going to start noticing common humanity more often, which is going to help us isolate less. And we're going to use mindfulness more in moments of suffering, which is going to keep us from over identifying with the crappiest and hardest thoughts and feelings that we experience. And before we wrap up, I just want to return to the emails that people were so generous to share. By the way, if you are one of the people who sent in an email, thank you so much. I know I said thank you for responding, but it's just nice to have any kind of back and forth relationship with people so that we can actually dialogue like humans about this stuff. It's really fun. So remember what people's knee-jerk reactions to the idea of self-compassion were. I imagine boo-hooing about my bad feelings and throwing myself a pity party. None of the elements that we went through just now were boo-hooing about bad feelings, right? I actually think mindfulness is the answer to this concern. We're not throwing ourselves a pity party. We're actually just noticing what thoughts and feelings are happening, right? Makes me think I'm trying to convince myself that all is well when I know it's not, like pulling the wool over my eyes. None of these three elements aim to convince anyone of anything, actually. Self kindness, I think, is the response to this knee jerk reaction. It's not all is well. It's, man, this is hard. I'm here for you. I'm so sorry you feel this way. What can I do? That's a very different quality than pulling wool over your eyes, right? So I hope breaking this down in this super granular way has actually helped illuminate a lot of the functionality of this particular kind of self compassion. So, like I said, The three elements of self-compassion apply to all of self-compassion, both sides of the coin, tender and fierce, inner and outer, still and active. What we talked about specifically today was the still or less active, more inner version of self-compassion. It's accessing the inner support for ourselves and being able to just help ourselves through these inevitable human moments. So, what we're going to talk about next time is the more active side of the coin, the fierce flavor of self compassion, and what the heck that means and what it looks like. And then later on in the series, we're going to talk about self compassion in decisions specifically. And that is going to be such a juicy conversation. So don't forget to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. If you loved this episode or you love the podcast in general, I would so appreciate you just scrolling to the bottom of Apple Podcasts and clicking the 5 stars really quickly. Leave a review if you are feeling extra generous. It's so amazing for me to be able to hear what resonates so that I can keep putting more of it out there. And it helps other people find the podcast, which, hey, a world in which as many people as possible are making powerful, authentic, self-honoring decisions is a world where people are making less selfish, hurtful, fear-based decisions. And I think that benefits everybody. So thank you for helping other people find the podcast. Make sure we are connected on Instagram. I am at KP Coaching. On TikTok, I am at The Decision Coach. I would love to hear what you thought of this episode and hear how your week goes, practicing self-compassion. And I'll see you next time. Hey, want to find out your decision style? Obviously, go take the decision style quiz. It's in the show notes and at kirstenparker.com/quiz. We all have our style when it comes to making decisions, but do you know how to use your default way of thinking to your advantage? Or do you mainly get stuck in the most annoying parts of overthinking and people pleasing? The decision style quiz has your answers, my friend. Take it right now at kirstenparker.com/quiz.